I'm Jaquanda.
I'm Britteney.
I'm Jacinda.
And we're Kuumba Lynx.
And you're watching 20 for 20.
From the roots to the branches. We're here with Britteney. Hey, Britteney. So, Britteney is one of the original members of the Kuumba Lynx Performance Ensemble, and we're sitting in a pretty important place.
Yes, where I went to elementary school 20 years ago.
Wow.
That is crazy.
It's also the place where we founded and started Kuumba Lynx, this building right here.
Yep. Black leggings, African print skirts, black leotards.
I did. This was intentional. I was like, this was the uniform.
That's what's up.
This is the adult version of the uniform.
Right. The upgrade.
I did. I was like, I know what I'm wearing.
And you look beautiful.
Thank you.
So what's been going on with you?
So I am still in the arts. I am a teaching artist of poetry and performance. I am a full-time artist, a nationally awarded artist. In 2015, I won the Rana Jaffe, which is given to 6 women.
Uptown.
This is a dog fight. Which is given to 6 women across all genres in writing across the nation, and I am currently in the process of working on my first full-length manuscript.
Nice.
Yeah,
Congratulations.
Yes.
That was a big honor.
It was a very surprising honor that I was not expecting. But no, I love the cohort of women that I won with, and we're still really close. And I think what the Jaffe does for young women writers is pretty important, and I'm still humbled that somehow I got it.
Let's just jump right in and talk about, we started to talk a little bit about it before the cameras were rolling, just about like what's been on your mind and just sort of the discourse that's happening in our city, specifically in this field. And I know that with KL, back in the day, it was the only real intention I think that we had was like to carve and hold space intentionally for folks that weren't getting to hold space. And I think, that's evolved, and a lot of our roots were in Panther movement, a lot of our roots were in Rainbow Push, in just local Chicago organizing movements, which oftentimes were always centering Black men. Can you talk a little bit about the work that you're doing today, how relevant it is when we think about Black liberation, which has always been at the forefront of the KL work, and clearly, the pathway that you're on. Can you talk a little bit about what you've been doing around that?
Yeah, so I'm a teaching artist, and so I work at Young Chicago Authors, and we facilitate a youth slam, but my work really is centered in my residencies, and so I work in 3 schools around the city. Sometimes they change, a lot of times it's the same. But when I started, I was like, okay, cool, I'm teaching poetry and I'm excited and I'm gonna teach. And I was like, my one thing is like, I don't want to teach like dead white dudes, because that's what poetry is taught to you in high school. But then I realized when I was looking at like who is considered like top poets, it's still men. And so like in my classroom, I try and focus on Black women, queer folks of color. Like when I taught at Rudy Lozano last year, and it was hard for me to pull Latinx and like Chicano poets, and I was like, okay, well, I need to step my game up. Like, I want my curriculum to reflect the students that I'm teaching. And I realized like that, and then, in the wake of Ferguson, I became like really involved in the Chicago activist community, but like all of these dudes were like always who were talked about and put in the forefront, and I was like, okay, cool, like I stand for what they stand for. But then when women were being murdered, systematically murdered, when trans folks are being systematically murdered, like none of these people showed up. And I was like, okay, cool, like y'all not fighting for us. And like in the wake of like, this is that 50th anniversary of the Panther Party. And I went to Oakland with my family, and I went and I listened to a lot of discourse, and I just listened to so many people talk about how women ran the Panther Party. But those are not the pictures you see. Those are not the images you see. Those are not the stories that are told about the women that sacrificed themselves. And I was like, yo, I'm not gonna be that like tired saying that like behind a strong man is a stronger woman. No, I'm going to be next to you or I'm not there. Like that's and so I tried to start focusing my curriculum and my education and my pedagogy around the marginalized voices within the marginalized community, which no one ever talks about. So like, how do I make sure, because I've got a big personality, I talk a lot, but I need to step back more so that other people can step forward. And I think often people talk about empowering silenced people by speaking for them, and I don't think that's empowering. If they're not speaking for themselves, then it's not empowered. Then no one's empowered, and you're just taking up space. And so in my work in the classroom and in my work on the page, I try and speak, who I am. I'm a Black queer woman, and those voices just aren't heard enough. And the intersectionality, like there aren't enough Black voices heard, there aren't enough queer voices heard, there aren't enough women voices heard. And then what happens when you're all three? Who's listening and who's speaking?
How do you think this is received within the community, especially around addressing Black men's leadership?
I mostly am associated with like-minded people, so like they're all very receptive. There's always, in the poetry community, you have like white folks that like their pseudonames are like Chinese names so they can get more, like affirmative action BS. And so like in the people that I trust, I'm always uplifted. This type of story is always uplifted. I think in the literary community, Black and brown or queer or Muslim artists are always typically like pigeonholed. Like this person is a performance poet, and this person is this type of writer, and you can be all of these voices. And because you have a passion for one discipline does not make you less. Yeah, I do slams, but I'm also a scholar. And yeah, like I published a book, but it doesn't mean I can't perform. And I think typically when it comes to like intersectionality in the literary community, Black and brown and just all of the marginalized people are often like, I go to shows and I'm the only person of color there, on stage and off stage, and it's like, okay, like and then people ask me questions and expect me to speak for Black people, and it's like, yo, that's crazy, because I live in Chicago and the Detroit experience is not the same as the Chicago experience. So like maybe you should have more people of color to answer these conversations, because it can't be me. And oh man, I don't know what I'm saying.
No, that makes sense. I mean, it actually speaks to the same thing that you were speaking on about, being a Black, queer, woman. Like you have a multifaceted, you are multifaceted. So therefore, you cannot be the only voice for certain people, and you are fighting for people to have a voice in whoever they are and how they come. And I think that really speaks to like the original, like some of the value that Kuumba Lynx was, founded on, just creating a space, holding a space for you to not be judged, for you to be celebrated for all of those different parts of you. And so I'm really interested in like how you're transferring that into now your mentorship in your schools.
I think one, like coming from Kuumba Lynx is like very misleading, because I like grew up in this space that was like woman centered and like person of color centered, and I went into a real world and they were like, hey, don't have a voice. I was like, yo, what do you mean? That doesn't make sense. I've had these women like uplifting me for years, and like women are supposed to be the forefront. Like that's what I understood, and then I got into the world and it was like, that is not what is true. And that is a culture shock in itself, because I've been involved with Kuumba since I was 8, so it like definitively formed how I saw the world and how I saw art and how I saw, you know, I saw women at the forefront, and I saw women on the front lines of actual, like, you know, we going to protests and things like that. And so in my classroom, in my mentorship with my students, like, you know, it's like I consider my writing to be like hood elegance, you know, like I'm going to tell my black ass stories in my black ass voice. You know, I also have a degree, I also have, you know, I'm a nationally awarded author, but like that doesn't matter. Telling these stories in my very authentic voice. And so like I talk, you know, I write in slang, and I'm not going to, I also like tell my students, like, you don't have to write for everybody. Not everybody has to understand your stories. My poems are for black folks. My poems are for black women, or for queer people, and that's who they need, that who needs to understand it. If the scholarly world, if the literary community doesn't get it, I really don't care. You know, if they want to get it, then they should do the type of research and the type of education that I was forced to do to understand Sylvia Plath, to understand like Shakespeare. You know, niggas in the hood don't grow up like with Shakespeare. But I needed to learn about it in order to get my degree, in order to get, you know, to pass high school, to pass like middle school poetry. So if you want to be informed about my stories, like I'm definitely down to always have the conversation. But I make sure that my students don't write for the audience that they're not actually trying to like seek. You know, if white people don't understand me.
Have you guys seen a big dog roaming around here recently?
Is that dog still lost? Holy shit. No,
Half hour or anything?
No.
that way is the last time I seen him, but that was like 40 minutes ago.
Okay.
Sorry about that. Yeah, if white people who interrupt my interviews,
Right.
they can
Because we weren't doing nothing.
clearly see 2 cameras. Yeah, if white folks don't get me, that's not who I'm writing for. And it doesn't mean that my poems aren't accessible to people outside. But I found myself for a while writing in styles that weren't accurate, and I would write poems and I would bring it back to my family, and they would be like, yo, what is this? And I'd be like, this is not how you talk, or this is not, I don't understand. And I was like, you know, that's who I need to understand my stories. That's who I need to understand my poems, is I come from, even though I'm a scholar, I'm very educated, very eloquent, all those things. You know, I grew up in the hood. I grew up very poor. And those things do not mean that they're like, that they don't exist in the same world. And so my poems need to exist in that world where it shows struggle, and it shows that there's an elegance, that there is a beauty, that there is a necessary, like, plane. That these things are necessary to be told in a voice that the people living these stories can access.
Yeah.
But, you know, Uptown is a beautiful place because before gentrification, it was the most diverse place in the city of Chicago. So I, from a young age, was exposed to all types of cultures, and that informed my ideals and my morals and my beliefs. And for a while, my poetry was not reflecting who I was, but it was reflecting on like what I thought poetry was supposed to sound like. And I would bring my poems back to where I'm from, and people were like, yo, what is this? Who is this? Like, what is this shit? And I was like, okay, how am I being authentic to myself, to my vocabulary, to my community, to my upbringing, to all of these things? And so I needed to start writing in a more authentic and more honest manner. And so some of that is like just poems all in slang, and some of that is all in poems that are like, all the language is like things that I've like pulled from college, and like, you know, feminist theory. And like, you know, like I want my poems to be feminist theory, and I want my poems to be queer theory, but they need to be accessible to the people that need these stories. And so that's what I'm trying to do.
One of the questions that we had was, we said, like, if you can think about when I participated in KL, I didn't know it would lead to, or like, so what's like the most like funniest or interesting, dope, wild, embarrassing thing that's happened to you because of your participation in KL?
We had a play once, and I was dancing in sequined pants that fell in the middle of the play. Luckily, we had tights on. So that's the most embarrassing thing that's ever happened to me, in which I continuously tell of any story, having my pants fall in the middle of a dance routine, and I just had to like I got down and like climbed to the first like row and like pulled my pants back up and got up and just got back into the dance routine. So that's the most embarrassing thing.
That was so when you were playing the ego.
I was playing the ego.
As a big girl.
Yes, as a big girl. Because when you're in Kuumba Lynx, you have to learn to break dance and tap dance and flamingo and graffiti and turntablism and all types of random things that I now have just like basic knowledge of. Shout out to that.
What was your graph name?
Issues.
Issues.
Which I still have all of, like, I still, like, every once in a while, like, I'll be, like, bored in a meeting and I'll just, like, start sketching issues. Like,
it comes in
it's like,
handy.
whenever I get, like, get bored, I still sketch it. It's still my graph name. I'm just not
like,
good.
our black book battles are, like, in meetings.
Yeah, exactly.
When we're stressed out. Do you have a moment, though, when you think that's funny and great? Do you have any other moments that when you think about like, wow, I might not be doing this?
No, I would. Definitively, I didn't know being a teaching artist was a job. I went to college to be a teacher. Possibly I was going to go to law school and follow my dad's footsteps. And when the position was offered to me, first at YCA, you want to be a teaching artist? I was like, no. One, that's not a real job, and two, that's not a real job. So I don't know what you're talking about. And I also, like, when I first took on the job at YCA, I didn't actually believe the organization was doing the work that I wanted to do. And I had a conversation with my mentors, with Rebecca and with Kevin, and they were like, well, then you need to make this organization what you think it should be. And I wouldn't. The first time I was given the opportunity to be a teaching artist was through Kuumba Lynx. I was way too young to be teaching. I was like 16. But I realized that I wouldn't have survived if I was a regular CPS teacher, because I don't want to teach somebody else's curriculum, and I don't want to force. I don't want to force things onto to black youth. Force these white stories onto black youth. And if it wasn't for Kuumba Lynx, I wouldn't know that I could do this. And so I was terrified, because I was like, that doesn't make sense. But I have two people that I literally could turn to, and I could see that this was possible because they changed my life. So how am I able to take on that path? Yeah, like the Kuumba Lynx made, and I'm so happy to be a teaching artist. I love my residency programs. I love my students to a fault sometimes. But yeah, if I wasn't in Kuumba Lynx, I wouldn't have known that art could be a career, because it's never told to you that art can be a career. So we were talking about how Kuumba Lynx has informed the path that I went. But really, one of the things, and I tell this story anytime somebody asks at any Q&A about how I became a poet, and it wasn't. So in second grade, I basically just stopped speaking. My grades were fine. I did all my homework. I've always been at the top of my class, but I wasn't happy here. I wasn't happy with my peers. My teacher was strange, and so I just stopped talking. So they put me in like a remedial reading, which didn't make sense.
That's the one. Respect awareness.
Respect awareness. And so which is a conversation about how when CPS doesn't know how to deal with students, they just send them to
some remedial program.
Sped classes, and so that's a whole nother conversation. And so I still wasn't talking, but I enjoyed myself, and I wrote, and they like, the only difference is no one ever asked me to read. Jacinda, Jaquanda, Anton never asked me to speak, and they just had me write, and I just wrote, and I wrote, and I wrote, and I liked it, and being with them and writing is what made me want to start speaking again. Like, I started liking what I was writing, and I wanted to share, and if it wasn't, so like, not only did they Being in Kuumba Lynx like help inform my career path, it drastically changed how the rest of my education would have gone. Because being in that program, I started participating back, and then I was dropped back into regular classes and so forth. And so yeah, that program, which was the precursor to Kuumba Lynx actually forming, really shaped a lot of my life. And then from that, Kuumba Lynx, they were like, okay, well, we're starting this thing, and I wasn't really an artist in my head, and I wasn't really a poet in my head, and I wasn't, I was really super anti-groups and the other kids at this school, which is still a part of my life. I don't like people, but I liked them, and so I joined, and I still maintain relationships with a lot of people from that very first year, and a lot of people that I've met over the years through Kuumba Lynx. But yeah, they like that program, this organization, this family, this community, from the very beginning, has been a positive influence. And yeah, so that's probably the most outrageous thing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And the trick was, that's so crazy, because that was like the birthing of KL like pedagogy, right? And before we were even calling it that was, we were creating curriculum that was hip hop education.
What's funny?
Yeah, go ahead. No.
Finish your comment.
Well, I was just gonna also mention that program, the gag, that program was created through the Panthers movement in Uptown. It was called Respect Awareness. It was to bring attention to the notion of young folks. You have to meet them where they are and know where they're from. Because if you have an investment in where someone's from and who they are and what their community is about, you can then begin to dialogue about and critique the rest of the world. And the school didn't get that. So the school was like, okay, yeah, community activists.
Right.
Y'all do this program. We're going to send all the bad kids there.
Right.
And we had some, kids that was challenging, standing on desks, cursing us out. And so we knew that, and having you in that space was really divine, because it really was exactly where you needed to be nurtured, with the kind of curriculum coming from the family that you came from, that had the belief system and the value system. Like, that was like the alternative schooling inside the fucked up.
Yeah. And it's funny that you mentioned that, because that's what I was going to say. I do remember when I realized that Kuumba Lynx was more than just an after-school program, because you two were involved in our lives as individuals, period, just from the history of being involved in our lives. But Kuumba Lynx, at that time, for me, was just the after-school program that my kid went to. And remember, she'd have to go to shows or whatever. And I'm like, she's grounded. She can't go. And you're like, but Brenda. And I'm like, I don't care. But she can't go swimming. She can't go to the beach. And she can't go to this Kuumba Lynx show. And it wasn't until I think maybe 15 or 16 when I know
exactly when this was.
Okay.
I was in college.
Oh, no.
When you came out of punishment? No, you're in college.
Punishment.
Oh, you're in college when I told you.
When we had the conversation.
But when I realized it, you were like 15 or 16, when I realized that this family, this organization, was a vehicle by which my child was maturing and growing. And it was different from every other after-school program or organization. I mean, school was someplace I sent my kids because they said you had to. She was going to learn regardless. She could have learned at home. But you said you got to go to school. That's fine. I'm not sending her to a Catholic school. I'm not paying for a bunch of money. You said you're going to educate her, and she's coming right here. But yeah, it was probably around 15, 16 before I realized how valuable Kuumba Lynx was, and that it absolutely had nothing to do with the school or with CPS. It was just housed there.
I think the most...
But yes, you're right. I didn't admit that to you until college.
One of the most important moments in my artistic career is this conversation that my mom's talking about. We were just driving, I don't know where we're going, and she apologized to me. And I was like, for what? And she's like, I used to withhold art or poetry or Kuumba Lynx from you when you were grounded, and I didn't realize how much it meant to you and what it was to you. And I was like, well, it's okay. Like, I was, whatever, my grades were, whatever. And she's like, no. Like, it took me a while to realize that it was, like, part of who you were, and not just, like, and really, and she didn't say this, but this is like a continued conversation with the outside world where I was just saying, like, I didn't know art was a career because everybody tells you it's a hobby and everybody tells you it's a phase and everybody tells you, and not only is art a career, it is completely integrated into politics, into education, and like, and it needs to be. And it wasn't like, it was communicated by them, but I only had 2 people telling me it was a thing, and the rest of the world was telling me that it wasn't possible and it wasn't feasible, and I needed to be practical. And I completely think a career in art and a passion for art is practical, is a job, is a career, is
Needed.
yeah, and yeah.
A necessity. Yeah, it's not like some people say that's like the extra, and it's just, for us it's always really been about, it's a necessity to navigate the bullshit.
Yeah.
Right? And the power of that, the power of you claiming and taking up space with your art is so critical to this world and the shift that this world needs to make. Speaking of art, who are like some artists, readings, writers? Like, who are the folks that you're listening to, or you're engaging and being inspired by, or
Patricia Smith. Patricia Smith is the god. She is the most important writer that has ever come across my life. Just Black woman excellence. Denez Smith, Fatima Asghar, Jamila Woods, Hanif, Willis, Rachel McKibbins. Oh, it's just
what songs in your ears?
When I'm listening to a lot of Pivot Gang, so I listen to a lot of MFN Mello, Joseph Chilliams, Saba. I really listen to mostly Chicago music. I'm so Chicago centric. Jamila Woods, Chance the Rapper. Some of my students, your friends, their band, they just released their first music video today, and I feel so good. I love them. I listen, Kaina and the Burns Twins, the Omais, Cardi B, obviously.
Yeah.
Rihanna is the most important woman. But mostly I seriously listen to Chicago musicians, some of my students there, like Christian Jalan, Capano, there's just so much culture and so much there's a renaissance happening here, and it is amazing, and not to say there aren't outside artists that I listen to and that I engage with, but typically with especially with music, I'm so just enamored. Lindsay, so enamored and so in love with the people in my life, with my circle of friends, and they inspire me every day. And in the writing community, I have a national network of people. Hugh Nguyen, Sam Sachs. There's just so many people that I've met by way of Kuumba Lynx and by way of Young Chicago Authors. If it wasn't for this work, then I wouldn't have met these other people. And I call them my friends, but they also challenge me every day. Eve Ewing, Nate Marshall, Jose Olivares, a lot of them just dropped books, and it's okay, cool, I gotta finish my manuscript, and I am inspired by the people who I can also reach out to when I'm hurting, and I try and keep a close circle of people that are constantly grinding and constantly working and constantly doing the work to restructure and rebuild the literary community, so that it's in our image as it should be. It's been in the image of white people for forever. Time for us. It's our time. And so I'm just constantly working and engaging with artists that like I was talking about, that look and sound like me. Black, brown, Muslim, queer, people my age, and a lot of people younger than me. My students are, I listen to some of my students' poems. I'm yo, I was whack in high school. Can't believe I was putting this out in high school. How are you this good and this young? And that pushes me all the time.
One of the things that Kuumba Lynx has grown into, right? Because when we started working with you all, we were teens, and we had you all in elementary school ages, and so we kind of grew with you.
Yes.
And then you all moved on, and we saw that a lot of the youth that had come through our programming had gone away and then returned, and we're still looking for those same supports. And Jacinta and I have intentionally carved out this new space for our 18 through 25-year-old youth. And so, being that that is, I just wanted to know, like, what do you think about that, and like, in the power that that brings to the culture of Chicago? Like, why is it important that these youth that are 18 through 25 are supported in the same ways that they were supported when they were younger?
I think 18, 19, and 20 are like super important years for artists, because particularly in like poetry, when you do youth slams, you age out of 18 and you can't do adult slams till you're 21. So a lot of like college, like first year, second year college students sort of lose the arts because there aren't spaces for them. And also like the idea that like when you succeed, often and particularly around people of color, when they succeed, they leave. And we need to start having people that are successful in whatever fields, all fields, come back and reestablish these roots in their communities. And so there needs to be space for them to grow in their communities. And there are a lot of gaps that happen. Like when I was like 18, 19, 20, there wasn't things for me. And that sucked. But now like lots of orgs are working towards bringing back in their alumni, and I think that's so dope and so beautiful, because you can't expect there to be change in the community if the people that aren't impacted by the community aren't the ones implementing the change. So like these students, these youth, these like young adults go off into, you know, not all of them, but a lot go off to like colleges where one is culture shock, especially if you go to like a PWI where like no one looks like you.
Are you saying a lot of them, or are you speaking from experience?
No, but not everybody goes to college. So there's like a different, but then not everybody goes to college, but it's like you go and you leave and you like are supposed to like be an adult, and you're not an adult when you're 18. You were just asking if you needed to use like permission to use the bathroom. But then we drop you into the world and tell you're an adult.
Right.
And so like there needs to be space for that growth and that learning and their process. And I love the Kuumba Lynx, and like a lot of the Kuumba Lynx staff are like former alumni, and that's amazing, because it sucks to be so passionate about something and to shape a lot of your life, and then you're like too old for it. And it's like, okay, well, what am I old enough for, and where do I go, and what do I do? And there aren't many spaces really for, or there weren't. It's better now for young writers in their like early 20s. You were like this weird adult, and when you're learning to write, no one like really teaches you how to publish. And you're lucky if you're in an org like Kuumba Lynx where you get performance help. Writing workshops are typically skewed towards younger or towards older people, and so you're just in limbo, waiting until you could get back in. So it's definitely necessary, because a lot of people drop the arts just because there's no place for them to express the arts. And like we were saying before, it is needed. Like even if you don't choose a career in the arts, having an outlet and a place to express, you know, it helps inform, like particularly writing, it helps inform like your everyday, like how you communicate with people. And so like it's very applicable to the regular world. And it just is like, it's fun. You need like fun in your life, and you are not given fun when you're like 18.
You know what?
Like being an adult.
Even beyond fun, it's funny too that you mention that, because as you keep bringing this stuff up, I keep thinking about where was and where she was, and I do remember her last.
Can you go back and say Britteney? So that
Britteney.
I'm not in the recording.
Her last slam, Louder Than the Bomb, and I remember her calling me in tears. Don't start crying crazy, lady. Because it had just hit her that this is the last time she's going to be able to do this on this side of it. And I was so just worried about my kid, because I I'm not crying. This is not my interview. I was just so worried about my kid because this had been such a big part of who she was. And now she's on her way to college, and she doesn't have this. She doesn't have us as a family. She doesn't have Chicago as a home. And now she doesn't even have her poetry. What's she going to do? And, I mean, it was an adjustment, but she made it, and she's still here.
Psych, YCA made a college slam because a bunch of people like me were crying and pissed off that we couldn't
But that's,
do the
I
festival.
think that...
But that was like part of that process.
Yeah,
That's
this
the growth
community
of
has
the
been
space.
it's been a
Needed to
growth.
make it.
You know what I'm saying? You guys started this back when there was none of this.
Yeah.
And through that, you didn't just grow an organization and make it bigger, but you actually grew with it. And at every turn, you were thinking, what do we need? What's missing? And then you develop that based off what the need was.
Yeah.
And so now that few month period that she had at 18 where she wasn't sure what she was going to do, other youth don't have to go through that.
Yeah.
Because not just KL, but other organizations too are creating those spaces so they're not being dropped in those year or, couple of months or years.
Yeah.
And also coming back to Kuumba Lynx, coming back to YCA, coming back to whatever org that you were involved in. Like when you're 18 and you're looking for like job experience, it is not provided. And then when you graduate college and you apply for a job, you're supposed to have a certain amount of years, but they won't give you a startup. And so like I told you my first teaching artist opportunity was with Kuumba Lynx when I was 16. And I was working with them, and I got a lot of my first job experience with Kuumba Lynx. And a lot of people are now getting some of their first. We start interning and training once you age out, and it gets you ready for
Life.
yeah, for whatever it is that you're looking for, because there is no preparation to be an adult. Like the things you learn in school don't actually prepare you to be in the working force. It teaches you about your field, but it doesn't actually prepare you for life. And being able to stick with something and learn from people, because I learned from them at 8, and I learned from them at 10, and I learned from them at 14, and I was able to continue learning from their experiences and their mistakes and their successes all the way up to 29.
Are you 29 now?
I'm 29, just like that. When you were like,
I thought
when
I
you
was
were-
29.
When you were like, the space from 18 to 25, I was like, I wonder if they know that was 4 years ago.
That's where the trickle came. Yeah.
That's why I laughed. I was
No,
like,
yeah.
I'm 29.
We actually because we're still pushing the funder world or just the world to acknowledge this cycle and this generational need, this continuum.
Yes.
So we can say 18 to 25, but the truth is that it never ends. Our need for community, our need to heal, that never ends. Our need to make art, right? And it never ends. And so I think the biggest lesson that we're learning, and I think it's so beautiful that here we are, sitting with 3 generations. One walked off because she can't sit still. That's what keeps her young. But the notion that Kuumba Lynx, we were practicing a lot of our ancestral traditions, right? Like very elder traditions back in the day of pouring libation and things that 19, 18-year-olds don't really think about. But I think it just speaks to this idea of a continuum of generations and folks needing each other constantly. And how do we build that? And I think you are really contributing to our city in building that city and that kind of world. And I don't know about y'all, but I am honored and I celebrate you. And I don't
Of
like to
course
use
I
this
do,
word.
too.
No.
It's like, I don't know about you,
Yeah.
but I love you.
Me
I
too,
love
but
you
you
too.
know I'm very
I've
biased.
been celebrating her for the last 29 years.
Right.
Right now, I'm more deeply into celebrating you two and what you do for the youth of our city.
Well, you make me proud.
Yes,
And
girl.
I've been celebrating you all her life. 'Cause I knew that one day she was going to have a baby, and you was going to be my baby.
Aww.
Y'all are soft.
Is there anything on the horizon that we should mention before we close out? What's on the horizon for Britteney or the whole family? What's
My brand, Black Queer Hope, hopefully comes out in 2018. It will be a full-length manuscript, coffee table books, and clothing. So that's what I'm shooting for. Let's see if it actually happens.
Anything y'all want to close out with?
Now, I mean, I'm just starting the third part of my life. He's a lovely man.
Okay. We wasn't supposed to make it past 25. Joke's on you, we still alive. Kanye West. My brother was probably gun smoked a woman into widow, wakes up in a cold sweat and fears the shit. This was late. Sorry, gotta stop. We wasn't supposed to make it past 25. Joke's on you, we still alive. Kanye West. My brother was probably gun smoked a woman into widow, a mother into headlines, a sister into vengeance, wakes up in a cold sweat and fears the cops will shoot me, hands up, mouth defiant, tells me be careful, they don't care about us out here, we could be hashtagged any moment, fears my name will be forgotten battle cry like Sandra Bland, Rakia Boyd, Ronisha McBride, sees my face in wildfire and tear gas and I see the irony. In Chicago, we love the shooters, pray for the shooters, raise the shooters. This is not a drill song, no statistic, just D-Boy, Bam from the low ends, Inglewood, Austin, Wild Hunnits, Chatham, Lawndale, neighborhoods white people yelp not to visit, like niggas still don't live here, like Chicago ain't left us for dead and wonder why we still breathing. My brother has survived 2 major landmarks in Chicago, 18 and 25. And I don't know how many native sons were gun smoked into ghosts to keep him here, because every time a black boy is murdered, it could be him on either side of the gun, living the only truth he knows, survive, shoot or push daisies, live or be another lit candle and poured out Hennessy, a ritual, fallen homie, teddy bears and faded pictures pressed against the school locker, an absent father, a reason for his boys to take someone's son. Mamas pray to stop the violence second, save their babies first. Is selfishness not a synonym for another day in the arms of someone who isn't scared of what you could do to them? I get it. I've wept tears of joy, turned guilt, when one of mine walks back through the door, when a different block is under fire, when another family needs one less table setting, and I don't care. That black boy wears my face and I'm not ready to bury me yet, and this is not a justification for murder or a plea for sympathy, just a reminder that these thugs you're so quick to unname, so readily monster into fake outrage, have roots in a bloodline in this city that have long since given up on them. Families that know how they like their grits and which tooth came out which. Mothers not ready to bury their children into protest songs and marches. Fathers who want better futures for their daughters than the ones they killed for. And I see the irony in that too. One day, karma, retribution, or another boy looking to prove his skin man might come for my baby brother, and there's nothing I can do besides pray he doesn't die an intentional bullet, or worse, a stray one. Often, I wake in a cold sweat, fear of being gun smoked into obituary or vengeance.
Yes.